As children, many serial killers abuse animals. In his confession, Jeffrey Dahmer talked at length about his adolescent fascination with dissection, even picking up roadkills to examine the anatomy. A boyhood neighbor stumbled across this dog's head, mounted in Dahmer's backyard. Around the same time he was mutilating animals, Dahmer had his first homosexual experience with a friend who lived nearby. But as he discovered his homosexuality, his fantasies became deviant.
It had nothing to do with him being gay. If he had been heterosexual, his victims would have been women.
At the trial, court-appointed psychiatrist George Palermo recounted one of Dahmer's teenage fantasies about a male jogger.
I liked him, and I had the idea of hitting him on the head and having sex with him. Those are the words that he stated.
He, in fact, tried to do that, but the man didn't jog by that day, and so it didn't come to pass. This was quite early.
Forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz spent many hours interviewing Dahmer. He feels that Dahmer somehow began to associate sexual arousal with the mutilation of animals and thoughts of harming and controlling people.
My best guess of how that happened is that he was at the age at which all boys are having sexual arousal in response to diverse stimuli. Boys of that age get stimulated while they're riding to school on the bus or on a roller coaster. And in the course of that, they can, without trying to, without knowing it, become conditioned to quite coincidental stimuli. And I think that's what happened to Dahmer, that somehow he became conditioned accidentally to thoughts of violence and control and mutilation.
Dahmer's sexual attractions and his ability to control them would become the central question in his 1992 sanity trial. In high school, Dahmer was regarded as something of an oddball. Often ridiculed, he resorted to playing the clown to get attention. Classmates began referring to any prank as doing a Dahmer. Perhaps his most creative effort was on a class trip to Washington, D.C. Classmates recall that on a dare, he talked his way into a personal tour of the Vice President's White House office, a spot not normally open to visitors. He attended his senior prom in May 1978 with 16-year-old Bridget Geiger. A nervous Jeffrey, afraid he would stick Bridget with the pin, had Geiger's mother put on the corsage. Just weeks after the prom, Dahmer would kill his first victim. There is no single key that unlocks the mystery of Jeffrey Dahmer, but one clue lies in the relationship of his parents, which was troubled at best. When Jeffrey was 18, they divorced. His mother Joyce left for Wisconsin, and Father Lionel, with younger brother David, stayed at a nearby motel. In the confusion of the separation, Jeffrey was left alone for several weeks in the house on West Bath Road. When he picked up hitchhiker Stephen Hicks, Dahmer didn't know he would kill him. They came back to Dahmer's empty home and had a couple of beers. But when Hicks decided it was time to get going, Dahmer was in no mood to be alone. The guy wanted to leave, Dahmer recalled. I didn't want him to leave. He picked up a barbell and hit Hicks over the head, and then strangled him. Jeffrey Dahmer had acted out his fantasy, and now the grim reality of a dead body was staring him in the face. He took the corpse into a crawl space beneath the house and cut it up, placing portions of it in plastic garbage bags. He loaded Hicks' body in his car and headed for the local dump. On the way, a policeman stopped him for swerving over the center line and administered a sobriety test, which Dahmer passed. Dahmer was just about to leave when the officer noticed the garbage bags in the back seat. Smoothly, Dahmer explained that it was garbage from his parents' house. The unsuspecting officer sent him on his way. Dahmer had told the most important lie of his young life and gotten away with it. A frightened Jeffrey Dahmer took the body back home and into the crawl space. There, with a sledgehammer, he broke the bones into tiny bits. He took the fragments to a hillside on his property and, spinning slowly in a full circle, scattered the bones all over the land. Stephen Hicks had totally disappeared.
The first slaying occurred in 1978. The parents had no idea what happened to their son. No trace of the body was found until Dahmer confessed in 1991. That was 13 years of living hell.
Jeffrey Dahmer was repulsed by what he had done. Already a heavy drinker in high school, he continued to seek refuge in alcohol. He entered Ohio State University in the fall of 1978, but drank himself out of school after one semester. His father was concerned and talked Jeffrey into joining the Army. He did so and trained to be a medic, spending untold hours studying human anatomy. He was shipped to Germany, but was discharged 2 years later at the age of 20, again because his drinking was so compulsive. Feeling lost, he came to Milwaukee to live with his grandmother in this house, tucked into the safe, tidy suburb of West Dallas. Although arrested in 1982 for exposing himself to 2 adolescent boys, the 22-year-old Dahmer tried, in his own words, to walk the straight and narrow. For a while, he attended church with his grandmother and stopped drinking. In his confession, he stated that he tried at this time to suppress any homosexual thoughts. He got work in a blood plasma center and later as a mixer, making candies for Ambrosia chocolates. But eventually, he slipped back into drinking. He began going out to gay bars and sometimes not coming home. In November 1987, in the 219 Club, Jeffrey Dahmer met Steve Toomey. The two left together and got a room at the Ambassador Hotel. According to Dahmer, they drank heavily and engaged in consensual sex. Dahmer passed out, and when he awoke, Toomey was lying in bed next to him, dead. Dahmer was confused. He bought a large suitcase and put Toomey's body inside it. He then walked out the front door of the hotel and hailed a cab. He had the driver help him with his heavy baggage and headed for his grandmother's house. With his grandmother gone to church, he took the body to the basement and dismembered it. When he was finished, he threw it all out in the trash. It had been 9 years since Stephen Hicks, and now Dahmer had killed again. This time, he would no longer resist his violent fantasies. 2 months later, Dahmer was back at the 219 Club. Outside, he met a 14-year-old Native American boy, James Dockstader. He asked James if he wanted to come to West Dallas with him and make some money posing naked for pictures. Dockstader agreed and became victim number 3. Dahmer was perfecting the process. Once back at his grandmother's house, Dahmer slipped a drug into a drink, and when Dockstader passed out, Dahmer had oral sex with him, strangled, dismembered, and then disposed of him. 2 months after killing Dockstader, Dahmer repeated the ritual with Richard Guerrero. In September 1988, the 28-year-old Dahmer left his grandmother's house and rented a cheap apartment in a rough section of town. The day after he moved in, he went cruising for men, and not far from his new apartment came across a 13-year-old Laotian named Suntom Synthesomphone. He enticed the boy to his apartment to take pictures. While waiting for the sleeping potion to kick in, Dahmer began to fondle the boy. The boy panicked and ran out of the apartment to his nearby home. When Suntom's parents heard their son's story, they called the police, who arrested Dahmer. On January 30th, 1989, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of second-degree sexual assault. He was released on bond until sentencing in May. In the interim, he would kill again. This time, the victim was 24-year-old Anthony Sears. At the May sentencing, the 5-time killer spoke to the judge and pleaded for leniency on his sexual assault charge. This enticing a child was the climax of my idiocy. If anything would shock me out of my past behavior patterns, it is this. The judge felt that there was still hope of saving the sex offender and sentenced Dahmer to a year in a work-release prison, with orders that he receive treatment for his drinking and sexual problems. But in a bureaucratic mix-up, as Dahmer approached his release date a year later, he still had not received counseling for alcoholism. In March 1990, Dahmer's father, Lionel, wrote a letter to the judge for the case, asking him not to release his son before he had completed a treatment program. I sincerely hope that you might intervene in some way to help my son, who I love very much and for whom I want a better life. This may be our last chance to institute something lasting. One day after Lionel Dahmer mailed that letter, his son Jeffrey walked out of prison. On May 13th, he signed a lease for apartment 213 in the Oxford Apartments. 2 weeks later, he would kill again.